So we've been talking about coronavirus and some employment laws. Today I went to a park not too far from my house and wanted to talk about some constitutional issues that may be arising because of the coronavirus pandemic. And the one that comes to mind immediately to me is the freedom of assembly. It's listed in the First Amendment right next to freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And the orders from the governor and the police in New York City, which are going to be dispersing crowds, and the orders to stay out of businesses and to stay away from each other. And even here in this park, the playground is taped up and closed. It all immediately says to me, are we implicating freedom of assembly concerns? I'm going to try to squish down about a full semester worth of con law in about a 1-minute video. But really the first question is always whether there's a protected right. Not everything that you might think might be included in a constitutional amendment is indeed a constitutionally protected right. So for example, in the First Amendment, we have slander laws. So you can't just say whatever you want. Some things are controlled and are lawful under the Constitution to be controlled. Freedom of assembly is no different. And so we have to look at whether the assembly is protected. And when we're talking about freedom of assembly, what we're really talking about is associations. So what the Constitution is really protecting is the right of people to assemble, to express themselves collectively, and to share an expressive idea. So, for example, a union might be an association that would be protected by the First Amendment. An animal rights organization, people meeting to discuss animal rights, that might be a protected assembly. But generally speaking, there is no constitutional right for people just to collect into a group. And so we may not even meet the first requirement under the First Amendment of whether whether social distancing is even something that implicates a First Amendment concern for freedom of assembly. But let's assume that it is. The next question is the government regulating a viewpoint? So if the government were saying only animal rights advocates couldn't assemble because of coronavirus, they would be singling out one particular group, and we would question whether that would be allowed under the First Amendment. But this is just a neutral law that applies to everybody equally, regardless of what your thoughts are or what you're expressing. It applies to everybody equally. But again, even if we assume that there was some First Amendment freedom of assembly right that were implicated here, the government still might be able to regulate that. And again, we get into the nitty-gritty of constitutional law, and there's a whole bunch of different tests that can be applied to determine whether the Constitution is violated. But they all essentially boil down to some type of a balancing test to determine whether the government has a legitimate interest in what they're doing. There's an analysis as to whether the government is going about fulfilling their interest in a way that minimally impacts the First Amendment right at issue. And it also weighs citizens' rights, the importance of the citizen in expressing or using their constitutional rights. So, in sum, I don't believe that any of the social distancing requirements or any of the other laws that we're seeing come out now as far as keeping people away from each other, as far as businesses shutting down, I don't believe that there would be a valid challenge in court. To the extent we can find an open court right now, I don't think there would be a court that would say, yes, this is a violation of the First Amendment for the freedom of assembly. There are some other constitutional rights that are implicated in all of this. There is already a lawsuit, I believe, for a Second Amendment issue because gun stores haven't been considered essential services and people are having trouble getting access to guns, and so they're concerned about Second Amendment rights. There are possible Fourth Amendment issues with quarantine that relates to unreasonable seizures. And there might also be some 14th Amendment issues relating to if the government were to step in and keep families separated because of quarantine or other reasons. There is a 14th Amendment right for families to be able to stay connected and to prevent the government from interfering in those rights. So this is just a quick little overview. These are very nitty-gritty types of questions, and we're not getting into the full analysis. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions about any other constitutional concerns that might be raised during this coronavirus pandemic.